Hey there, welcome back to our Rev Games Academy. Now that we've covered the basics of implementing sound effects based on player actions, let's take it a step further and explore how to create dynamic audio that triggers when the player enters or exits a specific zone. This technique enhances the atmosphere by making sounds respond to the player's proximity to certain areas in the game. Before you start, ensure that you have imported the necessary audio files into your Unity project. These audio files should be in a supported format such as .wav, .mp3, or any other compatible audio format as described in previous tutorials. These files will be used for dynamic audio playback when the player enters the trigger zone. Also, make sure that your scene is set up properly with the player, enemy, and ground objects all equipped with the necessary physics, colliders, and scripts. If you need more guidance on this, please check out our 2D game development tutorials. To begin, we need to set up the trigger zone. Start by creating a new game object and name it Trigger Zone. This will serve as the area where the audio effect is activated. You can do this by creating a 2D object such as a square and changing its position, scale, color, and transparency. If you need more guidance on this, please refer to our Unity UI development tutorial. Next, add a collider component to the game object, such as a box collider or a sphere collider, by clicking the Add component in the inspector window. If your game is 2D, you can add a 2D collider component. Don't forget to check the Is Trigger option, which ensures that the collider doesn't physically interact with other objects, but instead triggers events when other objects like the player enter or exit. After setting up the collider, we need to add an audio source component to the game object. This is where we'll assign the audio clip we want to play when the player enters the trigger zone. Configure the audio source settings, such as volume and spatial blend, to match the desired audio effect for the zone. Now it's time to manage the logic for triggering the audio. Create a new script called Audio Trigger Zone, which will handle the interaction between the player and the trigger zone. In this script, you'll define a reference to the audio source component. In Unity, we often declare reference variables as private to ensure encapsulation and maintain control over how these variables are accessed or modified. Inside the start method, ensure that the audio source component is properly referenced and set up. If the audio source field hasn't been assigned yet, the script will automatically grab the audio source component attached to the game object. GetComponent of audio source is a method used to access the audio source component attached to a game object. You also have the option to enable or disable looping for the audio based on your needs. In this code, we first check if the audio source is not null using the condition if audio source not equals null. This condition ensures that looping will only proceed if the audio source is properly assigned. When you set audio source.loop equals true, it tells the audio source to automatically repeat the audio clip as soon as it finishes playing. Next, the onTriggerEnter 2D and onTriggerExit 2D methods will check if the player enters or exits the trigger zone. When the player enters, the audio will begin playing, and when the player exits, the audio will stop. This behavior is made possible by calling the audioSource.play and audioSource.stop methods. The audioSource.play method starts the audio, and the audioSource.stop method stops the audio. Once the script is written and saved, attach it to the game object with the trigger collider. Next, ensure that your player game object is tagged as player, so the trigger zone can correctly identify when the player enters or exits. Now it's time to test the setup, run the game, and walk your player into the trigger zone. You should hear the audio start as the player enters the zone and stop when they leave. Make sure that your player movement script is attached and the player has a collider with the Is Trigger option enabled, allowing them to interact with the trigger zone. When everything is in place, you'll experience a seamless audio effect that responds to the player's movement in the game world. You can see that as the player enters and exits the trigger zone, we have the respective methods being called and the audio start and stop. That's it. Make sure that your player movement script is attached and the player has a collider with the is trigger option enabled, allowing them to interact with the trigger zone. When everything is in place, you'll experience a seamless audio effect that responds to the player's movement in the game world. If you found this guide helpful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more Unity tutorials. In the next video, we'll be creating audio mixers for sound management. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.